I'm Dr. John Hayes, and on behalf of Palm Beach Atlantic University in West Palm Beach, Florida, welcome to today's Zoom conference with U.S. Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. He is the chairman of the U.S. Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship and his policy advisor, Caleb Orr. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're very proud, Senator, that at Palm Beach Atlantic University, you have two of our graduates, Greg Lenkowski and Rachel Sackison, are both members of your team. They're two of our favorite graduates. And we want you to know, and all of our participants to know, that we have more quality graduates like them. We attract students from across the USA. And as a result of the Titus Center, now in its third year of development, our graduates can earn a concentration in franchising, which prepares them to work for franchise companies or to own their own business, which is the desire of about 97% of our students. And I want to shout out to my franchise students who are joining the conference today. PBA is a Christ First University. We are located in beautiful downtown West Palm Beach along the Intracoastal. And Senator, we look forward to hosting you at the Titus Center in the near future. More than 500, you're welcome. More than 530 people registered for the franchise conference today. Many of them, many of them asked me to please, Senator, be able to say hello to you and to send their best wishes. You have a huge crowd of supporters on the line today. One of these people in particular is 83-year-old Rolando Alfonso in West Palm Beach, Florida. He brought his young family from Cuba some 50 years ago. And after working at small jobs in New Jersey, he and his wife, Maria, saved enough money for a down payment on the Carvel ice cream franchise in West Palm Beach. Once again, demonstrating the power of the franchise system to help people succeed in business. And Rolando wants you to know you're his eventual choice for President of the United States, Senator Rubio. But meanwhile, we need you in the Senate. Prior to the pandemic, franchising contributed more than $3 trillion to the American economy, accounted for more than 40% of US retail sales, provided more than 23 million jobs. And we expect a franchise boom later this year. People who lose jobs in downturned economies, many of them don't want to return to their jobs, or they can't find a good enough job. And so they think about business ownership, and franchising provides thousands of opportunities for them. But meanwhile, Senator Rubio, we need your help to get the franchise engine roaring again, and we're looking forward to your support. We know you have 5 PPP conferences alone, today alone, and the Senate's in session, so we know your time is at a premium. We're grateful that you included us in your schedule. We're grateful that Caleb could join us as well. We've collected dozens of questions and many more coming in on the chat. I'm going to ask as many as possible on behalf of our participants and give you time to answer this. We do record our webinars. We post them at tituscenterforfranchising.com. Senator, the first question: what's Congress doing about the IRS notice that essentially makes the forgiven amount of the PPP loan taxable by saying that any forgiven expenses aren't deductible? Can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, so 2 different items. The bill specifically says that the forgiveness amount cannot be treated as income for purposes of taxation. We ran into that problem 10 years ago when they were doing mortgage forgiveness after that meltdown. But then the IRS comes out with this ruling saying, if you spent the money on any costs that you had, that those are not deductible as you normally would under business. So that's not the intent of the law. And so there's a bill by Senator Cornyn to clean that up. And obviously we have a little bit of time to get that done before the end of the calendar year, but there's strong support for that idea. That was never supposed to be in there. So my sense of it is that Congress will fix that provision before too long, the next time there's a legislative opportunity to do it.
Okay. So you're expecting that to happen. What about projection for round 2 funding? Is that anticipated? What's your position?
Well, there's still about $120 billion left in PPP guarantee funds. So there's still capacity to lend as far as PPP is concerned. I think really the question becomes, what do we do next as far as recovery? Because at that point, the needs of companies is going to be a little bit different. There'll be more capital intense and startup costs and compliance costs. If locally, there's all sorts of requirements for you have to do certain things, buy certain things in order to be able to be in business. So we're only beginning to talk about that part of it a little bit. I can tell you that we have two parts that we have to talk about: what would be covered in that additional assistance, and the second part that needs to be talked about is what's the mechanism for getting it to people. And it's my at least initial preference that we sort of look at the PPP infrastructure. We now have over 4 million applicants across 5,400 lenders who now have made contact. So we know about these companies, we know who they are, we know a little bit more about them. And I don't really think the SBA can directly if we ask the SBA to directly handle it, the agency is not big enough and not fast enough to be able to get that out there. So we have to, my sense is that we can leverage this existing mechanism to deliver that follow-up assistance. But we're only beginning to think about that because frankly, we're still sort of learning. And at this point, we're still speculating about who's going to need it, how much is going to be needed, and what kinds of things we're going to have to be covered by it. So we're only in the initial stages of beginning to think about that part of it.
Okay, so one of the most popular questions is this one: when will the SBA come out with their final guidance on forgiveness? It's getting harder and harder to play by the rules when we don't know what the rules are.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to you that I anticipate it could be at any moment, including today. I know that we've been in touch with them. We've been talking to them for the better part of 5 or 6 days. I think it's generally in a good place. To the extent that it's taken a little longer, I think it's been because the initial format they were using was probably more complicated than we thought it needed to be. So, but it could be as early as today. I certainly expect it at some point this week. And I think people will be generally pleased by it. Assuming we haven't seen the final version of it, but we're hoping it's going to be pretty simple and easy to use.
Will there be flexibility on the 8-week forgiveness period, especially for businesses who've been government mandated to be closed?
So I had a long talk yesterday with Mnuchin about it, and there's only so much flexibility that he has from a regulatory perspective. So if I were to guess, it's my strong belief that on everything we've heard that there's going to be a little bit of flexibility on how the 8-week period is calculated in terms of when it starts and when it ends, but not a lot. I mean, maybe a week or two on top of the 8. So really, at this point, if we want to provide more flexibility, it's going to have to be a legislative technical fix that goes in and redefines it in a way that makes the funds more usable, because it makes no sense at this point, given the way this crisis has evolved, to have money sitting out there for payroll that has to be returned, because it didn't make any sense. We're going to have to end up creating some new program to get it back to them. So I think that's a widely held bipartisan position. I think really the only impediment at this point is, how do we do it? How do we pass a bill that people don't see as an opportunity to add other things to it that are controversial? So that's the hope, though. That's what we're going to be working on. That's probably the next item on our agenda.
And your position, Senator, on the timeline for getting the country back to work. There's lots of controversy about this, that too many people are going to die as a result. We're going to see spikes as a result. Other people saying we can't wait any longer. We're dying without going back to work. What do you say about that?
Well, I think we need to begin to wrap our minds around that we're in the business of mitigating, not perfection. This virus has proven we have very significant restrictions now, and we still have people being infected. The nursing homes and intense care facilities are seeing outbreaks despite the fact that they're completely shut down and nobody can go in. So it's hard to say that, because when you talk about mitigating risks, you're immediately accused of saying, well, you're prepared to let certain people die. But that's not my preference. That's the reality, that we're dealing with a highly contagious virus that, if it infects enough people, will kill some people unless we make some additional advances in how to treat it. But no matter what we do, it's not going to be zero until we have a vaccine. So the question is, what is an acceptable level of risk? and I mean acceptable from purposes of reality, and how can we reopen the economy in a way that can manage it? If we recall, these restrictions were never put in place to lead us to an outcome of zero. They were put in place to prevent our healthcare system from becoming overwhelmed. And we've achieved that, certainly in Florida. And the question now is, how do we begin to get back to some sense of normal in a way that doesn't bring back the threat of overwhelming our healthcare system? And that's why I think you're going to see a staged opening that will involve a combination, restrictions. It's not going to be business as usual, but at least it'll be business. And obviously different counties and different states are handling it differently. But it's I agree. Look, I don't think we should just say, let's go reopen everything, get rid of all the rules, and just go back to being the way things were. If you do that, you are going to have a massive crisis. I'm not sure anyone's proposing that, though. That's a false argument. I think the question really becomes, how can we reopen in a way that mitigates against the threat of a catastrophic healthcare collapse, while we continue, and part of that, frankly, is the availability of rapid testing and the ability to quickly identify people who are sick and can get other people sick. Part of it is continuing to do rules on social distancing when we're out in public and the like. So it's it's complicated and it's different in different places. But I think that's the direction we're generally headed, because what we have now is not sustainable. We can't ask people to do what they're doing now for another 9 months, 6 months. I know California is going to try, but I don't think that's going to work. So there's some realities here and some choices trade-offs that have to be made, unfortunately.
Related to that is this question. We have a lot of restaurant industry people on the call. Restaurant industry has been decimated by COVID-19 restrictions. Reopening at 25% capacity means you get 100% of the cost, with at most 25% income. What's being done to view this industry differently than the standard doctor's office or attorney's office? Anything different there, Senator?
Yeah, look, I've made the point that I think the first industry into the crisis and the last one out is going to be hospitality. I would say hotels worse than restaurants, but restaurants nonetheless. Part of it is because of the restrictions, as you've outlined. Part of it because you don't entirely control what happens. In essence, we still don't know how willing are people to go out, even if you're open, or how much money people have to spend when we've had so many people that have been unemployed and not had regular income and are worried about the future. So there's some aspects to it. Also, part of the business model of many restaurants is the catering of large, parties that check in on a Friday or Saturday night to celebrate a birthday or what have you. That business is not coming back anytime soon. You have workforce issues, trying to bring back workforce and how much you're going to have to pay people in a climate where there are unemployment benefits that are more generous than what you might be paying for the job, or people that are afraid to come back to work for healthcare reasons. So there's all kinds of external additional factors that apply to the industry. Hotels are even worse because, frankly, even if you were to open up, if people aren't traveling because there's nothing to do, the tourism sector flatlines. So, but I do think that the industry is one that's going to require some special attention, maybe even outside the confines of the small business committee, because of those unique challenges that are going to apply across the board.
Okay. How about liability protection for businesses as they reopen? This is another concern of our group.
Well, unfortunately, that's become sort of a partisan issue where, I don't think anyone's arguing that we want to excuse gross negligence, but there is the real risk that someone, gets infected and says, I've been to 5 places in the last week, I'm going to sue all 5 of them. And it's a major risk. It's a major priority for Republicans here, and Senate Majority Leaders outlined this. There's, I believe, a hearing today to discuss the liability issue. And I hope we can arrive at some sort of a middle ground on it that makes sense, because I do think that poses a very severe risk for a lot of businesses to frankly be sued out of business. And so, it's something that's going to have to be tackled, though, at both the federal and the state level, because a lot of this liability is incurred at the state level via state laws.
So there's concern about employees suing employers as well, either for not opening soon enough, or for if someone does, an employee contracts the virus as a result of having to go back to work, not being able to collect unemployment. these are issues that people are concerned about as well.
Yeah, no, we don't want anybody to be infected, and we certainly want businesses to do everything possible to keep their employees safe. So we don't want to do anything that discourages those measures. But by the same token, this is a tough thing to prove, right? It's very difficult to prove I got it from this one place or from this one person. And so what will happen is you just sue people, and then and ultimately, if you're insured, your insurer steps into your shoes and settles the case, and so that fuels a cottage industry of these lawsuits. In the meantime, your premiums go up, or you might get dropped, and so it's a big challenge.
Okay. What about separating the PPP from the 7A program funds with SBA? Is that on your mind?
Yeah, they're not linked in the sense that we used the 7A platform as a way to launch it because we had 1,800 preferred delegated lenders that we thought would be a good way to start the program. Since then, it's grown to 5,400. But they're separate, and they're separate programs. And there was a technical glitch in the bill that sort of expired the 7A program that we've worked to get that language done here very soon. Could happen this week to fix it. But I think really the only thing that's changed with 7A has been that all the 7A loans have been on forbearance for 6 months. That will expire at some point, and we'll have to cross that bridge.
Related to that, allow no new policy changes to SBA 7A program through 2021. Could we continue to work under the current regulations so the banks feel comfortable moving forward without waiting for new interpretations or more rolling guidance?
Well, I think if what they're referring to is 7A, the program's largely not been directly affected by this, other than references to it in the PPP bill might have created some confusion. If it's PPP, the rolling guidance really is, yes, it's been a problem because this is a program that was, in a traditional sense, if you pass a law on a program of this magnitude, you have, before you even launch it, you have proposed rules and public comment over an extended period of time. We don't have the benefit of that time. This was passed after 4 days. It was implemented in 6 days. This program made 14 years worth of loans in the first 11 days. So, frankly, the need outpaced the capabilities to write rules. What we're trying to do now is make sure that as the rules are being rolled out and answering some of these questions, that they adhere to the spirit and the intent of the law. And for example, the guidance on certification, what certifies as a good faith certification, and ultimately on forgiveness is critical guidance that we're going to need to have. What we don't want to see is the assumption that this loan meant one thing and then some rule comes out and you realize it meant something else. And I think that's been a factor both in the slowdown of loan applications and in the fact that some are just sitting on the money right now and haven't spent it yet because they want to see the final rules before they decide to take it on.
Yeah, and not knowing what the rules are has been an issue for people. Related is streamlined forgiveness provisions, at least for loans under $1 million, because it's having a huge distraction for business owners and lenders in this regard, impedes businesses reopening. So
that's why the forgiveness application that'll be released here any moment, today, tomorrow, this week, is so critical because we want it to be as simple and easy as possible. And I would venture to guess that for the overwhelming majority of those who've taken this, it'll be a pretty straightforward process. I think where it could get complicated is in the calculation of what was payroll, what was overhead, what percentage of what, when was it incurred, when was it paid. And that's the part of it that we want to make sure is accurately reflected in the application. And so I'd rather them take an extra day and get it right than release an application they have to revise because of an unintended consequence.
Yeah, and related to that issue, these checks and balances will help assure that people who got this money use the money for the proper purposes and just wouldn't pocket it or take a vacation with it.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the one thing you don't want to, first of all, obviously fraud is fraud, okay? So there's already been one prosecution brought against small business owners who doctored and manufactured payroll records to get access to this cash. So if it's fraud, it's fraud. And then there is the question of whether a company got it that didn't need it. And that's tougher, and that's where the certification guidelines, my sense of it is that, over 99% of the loans are going to be automatically assumed as certified, and that some of the larger loans might be randomly audited. But for 99% of the loans, my sense is that there isn't going to be an issue on the certification part of it. On the what you spend it on, it's not improper not to spend it on payroll. It's just not forgivable. That part transitions into a loan. Look, from the very beginning of this loan, it was always, we've never said anything different. This was a payroll protection loan. It was designed as an alternative to the unemployment system. It was designed as a way to provide money for small and mid-sized businesses to keep employees on payroll facing uncertainty and downturns in revenue and all sorts of economic disruption. We allowed for additional discretionary spending to provide a little bit of flexibility, but that's what it's always been designed as. Now, what it turned out to be is that in many cases, because the time between the shutdown and the time when you got the money could have been as long as 2 months or a month and a half, for a lot of businesses, they now find themselves unable to spend the payroll money in an 8-week period and would like a little bit more flexibility on how 8 weeks is calculated or how that's put together. And that's going to require a legislative fix to adjust to that new reality, for which there is broad support. I think the question now is the mechanics of getting it done.
All right, so extending the 8 weeks or starting it at a different time, that's under consideration.
Yeah, ultimately, what we don't want to see, right, is the reverse. And that is, I'm a business, I laid people off, I've tried to rehire people, but I really can't. And I can't even reopen anyway, so I have nothing for them to do. I'm not going to go out and hire people that have never worked for me before and pay them not to work. I don't even know who these people are. I just hired them. That I'm more than happy to hire a bunch of people when 6 weeks, 9 weeks from now. And my argument at this point is that that's a new factor that we couldn't have anticipated, because no one really, I mean, this was all new to everybody. It's easy to calculate now, but go back to March, we didn't know what this was going to look like. But my argument is, if in fact people don't end up using it for payroll and return the money, we're going to be back here arguing, well, what do we do now to help them hire people? So rather than having to send them the money again, why don't we just figure out a way to be more flexible with it if they find themselves in that situation?
So what do you recommend business owners do now? What should franchisees be doing with the money when they can't reopen their business yet?
Well, look, I mean, the obvious thing is, to the extent you can hire employees and keep them on payroll, all that is, there's no question that that's going to be forgiven. Other than that, I would say if you're in a situation where that's not entirely possible, is I would sort of watch over the next 48 hours and see, as this guidance comes out, whether some of the small fixes that Treasury intends to do make it a little easier for you. But I think ultimately, the only advice I have, if it's not possible, is frankly, you're going to have to wait until Congress acts on it, which I hope will be very soon. I don't think there's any objection to extending the period in which payroll can be met. I think really it's just a question of getting it done. How do we do it? Because if I file a bill here to do that, I can get it on the floor pretty quickly, but someone's going to try to use that as a way to pass something else that may not be as widespread, and so it gets bogged down. So we've got to try to find a way to move on this really fast. I think there's a chance we can, because everyone's hearing the same thing. I mean, this is across the board. I mean, this is not unique to Florida or even to franchises.
Okay. Is there a thought about looking for programs that promote growth and not just recovery, such as extending SBA payment relief program through the year end or even for Q1 2021?
Yeah, look, there's going to be a whole other area of work that's going to involve recovery. And I think part of it's going to involve recovery of existing business models. And frankly, one of the things we have to start thinking about is how we reinvent sectors of our economy for the foreseeable future. I mean, there are some things that have happened after this pandemic that are going to permanently change consumer behavior and are going to create, even as they destroy or disrupt previous models, it's going to create opportunities for newer ones. And we have to be prepared for that too. So I think that we need to be a little bit more creative and take some time to think about what those opportunities are and what role government can play. But I think in the short term, there's the very simple cost that a lot of people aren't thinking about, and that is, what does it cost a small business who's now required to put up plexiglass or do all sorts of other things to flow traffic in a way that complies with local restrictions? There's a cost associated with it. How are we going to treat the sort of the compliance costs in that regard? So there's some unique challenges that we have to think about. But yes, there's going to have to be a recovery phase or an adjustment phase that will look different than PPP. It won't just be about payroll support, and what that looks like, how it's structured, grant versus loan, and all that. I mean, that's still something that we've got to think through and take a lot of input, including from the folks on this call.
How about, are you looking at models that, what do they suggest for the fall? Is it, you expect to see spikes? What about with flu season coming in the not too distant future?
Well, the complexity of the flu season obviously is that the symptoms are very similar, and so what you could have is a larger number of people going to if they're not vaccinated, going to the hospitals and showing up with flu symptoms and not having it, but nonetheless putting strain on the system. So I think we have to hope that this year's flu vaccine is very good, and we have to try to massively get adoption of this vaccine so we can keep some of those cases from happening. The second thing that I'm going to look for, obviously, is advances in treatments, because every single day doctors are trying all sorts of different things. And from what I understand, is not my level of expertise, obviously, but from what I understand from a lot of medical professionals is that the standard for care for COVID-19 is going to get better. We're going to get some better outcomes. We know, for example, that if you can get treating this earlier, before you have what kills people ultimately here is that your immune system overreacts to the virus and ends up killing you. And so the earlier you can get on a patient and prevent that from happening, the better the outcome is going to be. And then we know ultimately as well from what we're hearing that the solution to the treatment here isn't going to be one medicine. It's going to be a cocktail of treatments and medicines that help reduce hospital stays and improve outcomes. So we're going to look for advances in that. But I think really one of the breakthrough is going to be the ability to conduct antigen testing, not antibody, antigen testing, which doesn't identify the virus. It looks for aspects of the virus. And if it has enough of it, it presumes that you're infected, because those are more affordable. They can be done very quickly. To be very simplistic about it, a test you can give someone once a week that at a high level of reliability allows you to find people who are infected before they're symptomatic and become spreaders, and you can bring them out of that setting so they don't infect more people. The development of that kind of testing, rapidly, widely available, and easy to implement across a broad sector of people will be a big deal in all of this, because it will help prevent community spread and keep those hospitalization figures down. So a lot of what people are anticipating in the fall is going to be based on that. Obviously, we've learned that any places that concentrate large numbers of people pose a specific threat, especially like mass transit systems and things of that nature. So, Florida is not a mass transit state per se, but in parts of the country, that's going to be a challenge. So there's a lot of unpredictability here, but yes, there's an assumption that you're going to see some level of uptick in the fall as people go back to activities and people are in contact with one another. And then there's the great variable, which no one can tell you, and it's not, but the virus could change. The more people get the virus, the more it can mutate into something more dangerous or less dangerous. We can't count on that. We can't model for that. What we can model for is what we have now, and hopefully we can have enough widespread testing that allows us to have certainty that no one in this school, no one in this office has it. But to do that, you got to have a test that's affordable and that you can do very quickly. You can't nasal swab everybody, send it to a lab, and in 12 days get it back. By then they might be hospitalized.
How close are we to the antigen testing being more popular and available to us across the country?
Yeah, there's a few that have already been approved by the FDA. So it's just a question of deployment, producing enough of them and getting them to the right places. The priority is always going to be, you want to test healthcare workers. I mean, why are you having outbreaks in nursing homes if they're shut down? It's because it's coming in with the workers, right? So I think you want to prioritize where it goes first. There's a sort of a Shark Tank effort where federal money was thrown in and it's creating this open competition. You got over 100 companies now that are competing for these funds to receive funding to prove that their technology works. So my sense is it isn't going to be one, it's going to be 8 to 10 different ones that are available and out there, and so that can be implemented. So we're getting there. That's a great question. I don't know, over 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks away from it, but it's happening. And so hopefully, by the time we get into September, late August, it's more widely available and again, reliable enough to be meaningful. You can't have something that's half wrong, but if it's 80% right, that's not a bad thing. If you give it enough, you're gonna catch these cases before they become really problematic.
A franchisee who is in the gymnasium business says that the additional $600 a week for unemployment is creating a problem, as part-time hourly workers are making more on unemployment than they were working, so we can't hire people back. What about that?
Yeah, no, I've heard that. I said that a couple of weeks ago in a newscast, and some commentators went crazy and accused me of saying that people were lazy. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying it's what I'm hearing, right? People are telling us that. And every call I have, I'm hearing that is a factor. And it is what it is. I mean, it's a real factor. It's an impediment to rehiring in some cases. And so I mean, it's not a permanent change, you know, and it's not like it's easy to get unemployment. These systems have been bogged down, but it's become a factor. And we're hearing that from employers. So I don't think that's going to change, but the program, it does expire after 4 months. So it won't be a permanent factor, but it has been a factor right now.
Mm-hmm. Another question is related to the SBA. Can the SBA be directed to extend the current program where the SBA is making payments for 7A and 504 loans? An extension of the program through April 2021 should get us through the crisis. This has been a huge help in keeping our doors open.
Yeah, it would require, again, I don't know what the 7A program, its timelines haven't changed per se, other than this technical fix that needs to happen to make that clear. But, you know, in terms of the programs that were created, for SBA to be able to go beyond certain timeframes would require us to act legislatively. But look, let there be no doubt that this program, despite all the reported glitches, I believe has been one of the most successful, urgent emergency responses the federal government's ever implemented. I mean, we're talking upwards of 40 to 50 million workers by the time this is all said and done who will have their payroll covered as a result of it. We're talking about over 4 million recipients across 5,400 lenders. The impact of it has been extraordinary, and the stories out there are unbelievable in terms of the people it's helped. So that alone, despite all the noise you hear from some of the national press about Shake Shack and these guys and that guy, every senator and every member of Congress is going to hear about it if something like this just goes away overnight. So I'm pretty confident that there's going to be some effort to add to it in terms of whether, even if it's not dollars, time frame, and so forth. It's just a question of getting to that point.
Okay. Can we get a clarification as to why the $10,000 EIDL promise for every small business that asked for it was not provided in full for some? I received half the amount. I don't understand.
They're rationing the money. There's just not enough money in the program for the need. And frankly, one of the reasons why we created PPP is because we knew that that program, which is designed really to deal with an emergency in a geographic area, you know, responding to a tornado or a wildfire, was not designed for an entire country all at once. So I think they struggled, number one, with technology that was overwhelmed. I think that's changed. They've now moved to a cloud-based system. And number two is just dollars. I mean, if you add up the requests, we're talking about another $300 to $400 billion just for EIDL. So I think it's going to get better, and it's moving further along, but they have X amount of money based on X amount of requests, and they're trying to sort of ration that money to reach everybody at some level.
Okay. And for the next round of coronavirus relief, are you in favor of eliminating the federal payroll tax to help stimulate economic growth? This has been discussed by the U.S. National Economic Council.
Yeah, what I've argued is I'm open to, you know, any proposals that are out there that would be helpful. I'm not sure at this stage how helpful that would be if the fundamental challenge that we have is getting people back to work to begin with and getting businesses up and running. So as I said, there are other people here that are less, they think there are better uses of those dollars. So I'm not reflexively against it. I just want to make sure that it works for whatever we're going to be facing in the fall in terms of the economic impediments we have.
So there's another question from, we're not eligible for the PPP. The franchise is not listed on the SBA registry, and we were forced to close, abated all rent to our stylist renters. Wasn't fair to charge them when they were making zero income. Our landlord would not discount our rent. When we asked for help, he actually wanted us to sign an agreement for 2 months free rent in return for paying him more for the next 3 years. Any help for businesses like ours?
Well, I don't know why they weren't eligible. As I said, I don't know what their business structure was. There are some business structures that, you know, for a variety of reasons were not covered. And I'd have to know more about why it is they weren't eligible for this assistance. In terms of the real estate market, look, there are things we can do at the federal level with federally guaranteed mortgages or on a building. If you're a landlord that has something that's federally guaranteed, there are things we can do. When it gets beyond that, there really isn't. I mean, anything the federal government can do to tell a landlord, and to be clear, I mean that's a factor here as well, and that is that across the real estate sector, the landlords are going to be the next part of the contagion as people begin to fall behind on both commercial and residential rentals. And yes, some of these are owned by big conglomerates who can shoulder some of it. And some of this real estate is held by somebody who's retired, and all their retirement savings are tied up into some building that they own and they collect rent on. So it's an additional economic constraint with regard to that. But in terms of the specific, what we can do to help, I think a lot of it would depend on the business structure that was impacted and why it is they weren't eligible.
This franchisee wants you to know, she says, we are so grateful for the support Senator Rubio has shown for small businesses, and we look forward to learning about what's to come, and we remain hopeful, and many thanks to the Senator and others who are helping us. This is a franchisee who's dealing with around 135 brands, but not included on the SBA franchise registry. And so they're concerned about what's going to be available for them in relief packages. The next round of CARES package, the CARES package could include them. PPP does little to forgive expenses beyond payroll. What relief is forthcoming to assist business owners like us in recovering our losses?
Well, look, there's a sector of the economy, and we've heard from them, that are really not covered by any of the things that were done. We have a very diverse economy with a lot of different structures, and there's a number of different business models that are not covered by the small business piece, by the federal piece, by anything else. And so, I think that's going to be a big part of the discussion, is what do we do with these industries that have unique setups that somehow do not allow them to get covered with regards to this. To these programs, because there is a sector of our economy, different industries, because of the structure of their setup, that weren't covered by anything that's been set up so far.
And related to that, is there an appeals process with the SBA or any resource for businesses whose PPP applications were processed incorrectly? The bank we applied with miscalculated the amount. We originally applied, so they didn't get as much money as they thought they ought to be able to get. Anything they can do about that?
I'm sure there is. I'm not sure it's been created. This program is so new, but I'm sure there is, including being able to go back to the lender and have them resubmit. As I said, when I hear oftentimes someone's been denied a loan, or this is not the case with this one, but what it may not have been is processed by your lender. So the question is whether another lender would have done a better job. That's a great question. I don't have an answer about whether there's an appeal. I would imagine if it was miscalculated, there has to be a process by which you could come back and get it properly calculated and get the additional funds made available.
Can they contact your office, Senator, or what would you recommend they do in a case?
Yeah, if they contact our office, we'll be more than happy to help them and guide them. We'll ask that question as well. So, and I apologize, I have to run because I have a vote that started at 12. Yeah. So
grateful for your time, Senator.
No, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I hope it was helpful. Please, you can check in with us at contact our office. Everyone's still working, and we're going to look into that appeals issue as well.
All right. Give our regards to your committee members. We appreciate everything they're doing for us in franchising. We're going to come back with a roar in the coming months. Thank you, Senator.
I hope so. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we have Caleb still on the line with us. So, Caleb, here's a question that gets rather detailed for this individual. 50 franchisees who depend on products that they manufacture, and the franchisor provides the products at cost, but they're molded in China with molds that the franchisor paid for. Our company is in Louisiana. We're capable of doing, we have companies in Louisiana that are capable of doing the molding for us, but China will not return our molds. With the downturn of 50% of our business because of COVID-19, we do not have $200,000 to $300,000 to purchase new molds unless we can receive financial help from our government. We will continue to be captives of the Chinese. Anything the administration can do to help small businesses exit from China.
No, that's a really great question, and that's something that's of great interest to Congress right now. In fact, one thing that's been discussed on PPP is, as the senator mentioned, seeing if it was possible to make forgivable any kinds of new capital expenditures that are made necessary by the coronavirus, both in the public health sense, but also in the economic shock sense. And so the idea is, are there things that we can do to PPP to help it become, PPP was drafted for the lockdown economy to help put payrolls on ice. And as we start to reopen, we're obviously facing a different economy. So what does PPP look like for the pandemic economy is a critical question. I think there's also a number of things going on in Congress and with the White House that might answer that question. First, Peter Navarro, who is the White House Trade and Manufacturing Advisor, is running a Defense Production Act process by which they can make different loans and loan guarantees to companies that are producing things that are essential to the pandemic response. So if there's any connection whatsoever to the pandemic response, then there might be some financing available there. There's also been some discussion in Congress about creating a reshoring or onshoring fund to help companies shift production out of China. This is something that countries like Japan have announced recently. So that's also under discussion. And I wanted to just make one addition to the discussion on the prior question about the appeals process. The SBA has an independent office of hearings and appeals, which handles the appeals process for certain designations. So you might check the SBA website. They have a specific page set up for filing an appeal with OHA. And you're also welcome to contact our office as well so we can make sure that that request makes it into their process.
Great, thank you. Many franchisees have not been able to get PPP money. They were told the EIDL money was closed out on May 6th. How can we get assistance? What else, is there anything else, Caleb, that you know of that can be done?
Well, so first of all, you can apply to become a franchise on the franchise registry with SBA. We know of a few different companies that have been able to get on the list since PPP began, because if you are a franchisee of a registered franchise with SBA, then you're able to get PPP. And so we're aware of that as a possible process. Beyond that, I guess it depends on the reason why a franchisee could not get PPP. There's the registry, but then there's also size. We've heard from some large franchisees who own, over 100 or a couple hundred different locations of a franchise, in which case the maximum loan of $10 million is not large enough to cover their full workforce. And that's one of those areas where, like Senator Rubio said, there might be some gaps between the federal programs, between what PPP is able to do versus, say, what the Federal Reserve is offering mid-sized companies. And so that's something that we're looking at and trying to see if there's anything that we can do to make PPP more flexible, but also make sure that the Federal Reserve facility is keeping in mind some of these companies that were not eligible for PPP or frankly, who took PPP and were, I think, had to return it due to some of the public outcry. The bill included in the statute an exception for NICS Code 72. If you're in accommodation or food services, then you could apply categorically, regardless of whether or not you're on the franchise list or not. And that was one of the reasons why we did that was because we were aware that the franchise designation on the SBA's registry can be somewhat arbitrary between what counts as a franchise and what doesn't. And so for this accommodation and food services, which had been impacted so hard by the pandemic, we made this a categorical exception so that anyone in that sector could apply if they had fewer than 500 employees per location, which is most franchises.
So how often, Caleb, and you are the policy advisor to the senator, is your time spent mostly with the committee, Small Business Committee, and how often, question related to how often are franchise-specific topics addressed by the committee?
No, that's a great question, and it's appropriate for the Titus Center, I guess, to have this discussion. This was something that was at the front of our minds when we were drafting the CARES Act. Like I just talked about, we put this exemption in there because we were aware of some of the shortcomings in the franchise designation process with SBA. And so we're really aware of it. I think we are curious to learn more from you guys, of course, but this is something that the SBA has a separate policy for. It's something that we created an exception for because of our knowledge of that policy. And I think going forward, it'll be an interesting way to see how we can help local economies, revitalize from the ground up by increasing the ability of franchisees to expand. I think that's going to be, in this world where you have so much money that's out there in the financial markets, and businesses really, taking out a lot of debt to make it through this crisis. It's going to be interesting to see how the composition of these industries change in terms of if there's more consolidation. And so I think what we're interested in is we're looking to see, what does it look like for franchisees to expand, who may not have access to capital markets in the way that some of these large companies have. And so something we're interested in and hope we can get more information about.
Do you know what percentage of franchise businesses have received PPP money? Do you track that kind of information?
No, so we don't have that information. SBA would, but at this point, the data has not been provided. I mean, obviously, they're still compiling a lot of the data, and I think we're expecting to get a lot of data once it's all finished. But no, at the moment, we don't have it.
Okay. And here's another specific one where we acquired a hotel on February 25, and we're not eligible for PPP. What can we do to get assistance as the lenders are holding the February 15, 2020 date as the golden rule, and we are out of luck? It may be out of luck.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? What was the reason why it was denied?
They acquired a hotel on February 25, could not get PPP money, any assistance that they can get.
No, that's really tough. The reason for the February 15th date was that you didn't want to have the situation where you could have businesses that just came up with a form once they heard the program existed, and then were able to get free money basically for it. Okay. So I'm sure there's some collateral damage there, and it sounds like an example where there is. So that's helpful feedback, and maybe it's worth considering exceptions if there were acquisitions after the date for businesses that were already in existence.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So lots more questions, Caleb, but there is a comment that I see. The senator is well loved in Canada too, by the entire country. So pass that along to him. This came from a franchisor in Canada.
Great.
And a lot more questions, but many more than what we're going to be able to cover. But as you had said to me last week, we can submit these questions to the senator's office. You can help us get answers. We will disseminate those answers to people who have been on the program today. We do post this information. We do post our conferences at Titus Center for Franchising.com. I know you also are tight on your schedule today, Caleb, and we appreciate the time that you have given to us. Any closing comments you'd like to add, please do.
No, thank you very much, John. Thank you for hosting this event, and thanks to all the attendees for coming and for all of the great questions. I've done a fair number of these, and these were some of the most detailed questions that we've heard. I think the only group that's beat you guys so far is the CPAs, and that's not, that's a good thing not to beat the CPAs on that.
No, exactly.
So we really appreciate we really appreciate it, and appreciate all the work that you guys are doing during the pandemic, and hope that as we start to reopen the economy, there's more assistance on the way.
Great. Well, we look forward to having you and the senator on a future program with us, and we really want you to come to West Palm Beach. Come to our campus. Everybody loves our campus when they come to Palm Beach Atlantic University. And our students are spectacular. So come and spend some time with our students, and you'll want to hire more of them.
Great.
All right. Thank you. And thank everyone for joining us. You'll find the post of the program at tituscenterforfranchising.com. Look under the conferences page. In addition to that, look for information about our educational programs, our online education, our advisory board with Franchise Matters. We're educating the next franchise generation at the Titus Center for Franchising at Palm Beach Atlantic University. God bless you all. We look for an end to this pandemic as soon as possible. Stay healthy.